Hello, listening readers. This is going to be my first video, the prologue to my book, The Hidden Hunters. It's also going to be my first YouTube video ever, so let's see how this goes. And thank you for being here. Prologue, Theris Yarn. As a general rule, Theris hated meetings that happened in dark alleys, but it wasn't his place to question the wisdom of his superiors, however much he sometimes wished it was. If they wanted him to receive his next orders from one of their contacts in the cavernous darkness behind one of Huron's seedier taverns, there wasn't really anything he could do besides say, "I'll be there." Well, it turned out there was one other thing he could definitely do. He could freeze to death, that was what. The cold autumn rain falling on his head was starting to leach the warmth from his bones. He shivered deeply as he waited, muttering silently to himself as he did so. He wanted nothing more in this moment than to summon up just a teaspoon of magic in his hand and create a fire that could keep him warm. But again, orders conspired against him. He had been told, in no uncertain terms, that he was not to use any kind of magic while he was waiting for the contact. He was only permitted to use magic if it felt like the meeting had been discovered and his safety was in question. However much discomfort it gave him, he intended to follow that order to the letter. He suspected that he had been told this as a kind of test. He didn't know from where, but he was sure he was being watched by someone. Eyes were no doubt trained on him, seeing if he was disciplined enough to listen to all orders, even the ones that on the surface seemed pointless. Maybe it was the bum he'd spotted trying to lurk in the shadows at the entrance of the alley. Maybe it had been the drunk bird woman who'd given him a fishy stare as he'd walked past her shop. Realistically, though, it probably hadn't been either of them. If his feelings about this next job were right, then most likely he was being tested by someone higher up, and the person they'd send to watch him would be someone he would never see coming. Literally, as it turned out. Theris was nonchalantly turning his head to the right, looking down one end of the alley to see if anyone was coming. He didn't see anything. He dropped his head and prepared to pretend to drink from a hip flask of wine. "You know, I've always thought those flasks looked a little unseemly," a voice called out from his right. Theris quickly looked up. Standing in the darkness, where absolutely no one had been a second before, was a rather young-looking human girl. She had on a hood and cloak over her head to keep the rain off her. "To me, they just seem to scream, 'Alcoholic who's trying to hide it,'" she said dryly. She tipped her head a little so that Theris could properly see the grin on her face. She held out her palm in front of her. It lit up with a warm, inviting flame. "Oh, sorry. Heartbreaker," she added on, almost as an afterthought. Theris released the tension he hadn't even realized had been building in his shoulders. That was the code word he'd been told to expect. He turned to get a better look at her. "Deal breaker," he said back to her. "And I'm not an alcoholic," he added defiantly. He didn't want her getting any false impressions that might compromise his potential standing. "Yeah, I know you're not. We wouldn't be approaching you like this if we thought you were," she said, getting closer to him. "The council showed me a picture of your face. They wanted me to be extra sure I was dealing with the right person before I gave them the job. Congratulations. You passed. You gave me the right code, you did your duty, and you didn't use magic. And, as a happy bonus, you look like yourself." She held up her fiery hand. Theris stared at it warily. Her grin shifted slightly until it became something more like a smirk. "Come on, you can get closer. The rule was only that you couldn't use magic, not that you couldn't take advantage if I offered. And I am. It's quite cold and wet right now, and I'm sure you could use some warmth." Still, Theris hesitated to move. The girl rolled her eyes in amusement. "Well, I'd rather not stand in the rain for a second longer than I have to, so I'm going to stand under this tavern's awning." Theris frowned, looking upward. "What awning?" he asked. She smiled. "This one." She waved her hand, and the stone at the back of the tavern began to undulate until it finally jutted out into the alley, forming a small ceiling that could protect a person or two from the rain. The girl walked under it and took off her hood. Theris sighed. He wondered if this was still part of the test. He ultimately came to the conclusion that, no, the test was probably over. This was just this girl's personality. Great, he thought to himself. He slowly trudged over to the new dry spot. The girl moved over to accommodate him. "So tell me," Theris said, hoping he was keeping the irritation out of his voice, "did the council intentionally choose a day when they thought it was going to rain to test me further, or did it just work out that way?" The girl gave him a sly look. "As a matter of fact, they did consult a weather sage's report before calling on you. A very good deduction on your part. I can see why they want you for this job." Theris frowned again. "You know what my job is, then? You aren't just here to pass on the information? They entrusted you with the actual details?" The girl nodded. "Yes, they did." She cocked her head a little as she looked at him. "This is your first step into rarefied air." Your first job for the council directly, not one of their subsidiary organizations. I know you probably think I'm being sarcastic, but I mean it, and I'll say it again. Congratulations. Anyone who's gotten the attention of the council and Lady Shade herself is someone who's coming up in the world. Theris was trying not to react too strongly to anything she was saying, but at that statement, he couldn't help himself. Just for a moment, he allowed his eyes to bug out. Really? He asked in wonderment. Really? The girl answered with certainty. Theris dwelled on that for a full minute, brooding in silence over the implications of that fact. Finally, he turned to look at the girl. Did he dare believe what she was saying was true? Yes. Strangely enough, he did. Staring at her in a new, more respectful light, he stood up straighter than he had been since she had arrived, and started addressing her more formally. What does this mission the council wants me to take entail exactly? The girl smiled at him with a grin full of teeth. Theris got the distinct impression of a wolf about to devour its prey. He fought the urge to cower in fear. Tell me what you know of the other side, she commanded. Theris blinked. He could have guessed for a week without having thought she would ask him that. He racked his brain for an answer. Not much. I can't say I've ever been or wanted to go. It's a world fairly similar to ours in a physical sense, except there is no magic there. They rely only on what science can do for them to get by. Theris paused for a moment. It really never sounded like a very appealing place to me, to be honest. It's not, the girl said very matter-of-factly. Oh, it has some charms, but so do most hellholes if you look hard enough. But that's not the point. The point is, your extremely basic description is nevertheless correct. Earth, their name for the other side, is like a backwards version of Zahan. The rumors that you absolutely can't use magic on the other side aren't quite true. There is one way to use magic over there, but only one way. She pulled out a tiny little wooden carving. It looked like a unicorn. The only way you can use magic on that side is if you store it in an enchanted artifact and take it with you. No generating this yourself, she said, gesturing to the fire she still had burning in her hand. No individual can use their own magic there, not even someone born on our side who manages to travel there. The girl extinguished the flame in her hand, stepping out into the soaking rain. Before Theris could even ask her why she had done that, she whirled back around, poking one of her fingers into Theris's chest. Only someone really, really desperate would willingly leave our world and all that we can do here to travel there. And most people, frankly, are not that desperate. Theris could read between the lines. Gingerly grabbing a hold of the girl's finger and getting it off of him, he said, Most people, you say. I'm assuming that means there are some who are. Is that what this mission is about? She beamed up at him. A quick study. Yes, that is what we are hoping you can figure out for us. Nearly 2 decades ago, there was a rather unsavory group of criminals that we nearly had cornered before they, poof, disappeared. She mimed shock at seeing something disappearing. Regular thespian, this one, Theris thought to himself. You call them criminals. Were they members of the Erevan Rebellion? Theris figured they were. That would be his best guess as to why the council would be interested in finding them. Although, Theris scratched his head absently. 20 years? Did the timing match up for that? Apparently the girl could see him struggling. They were Erevan followers, but unfortunately for them, there was no active rebellion at the time they were around. You can think of them as kind of a, proto-rebellion. The first kind of people that inspired the rebellion in the first place. Theris saw the first hint of an uncontrolled moment from her, when her lip twitched a little as she was describing them as Erevan followers. From the looks of things, she did not like that. But her composure didn't slip any further, and she continued. Anyways, without the luxury of a wider rebellion for them to hide in, they decided to abandon Zahan and flee to Earth, never to be heard from again. We did initially send a few agents to the other side to look, but nothing turned up. Eventually the case went cold and we moved on to other problems, certain we'd never get a real lead on them again. But that all changed recently. Well, supposedly it did. To be quite honest, the council is of two minds over whether the information is real or not. Theris realized where this was going. Some anonymous source told you where to find some members of the old group, but you don't know if it's real and you don't want to send any seasoned agents off to look, so you're hiring the new guy who's been trying to get promoted to a job for the council. He said, stabbing his thumb into his chest, to do the job instead. She smiled. Yes, that's exactly it. Because, even if a lot of them don't believe it, they do need to know. This is not information they can just sit on. But again, like I said, they don't trust it. Resources and manpower are so tight these days that they need to get creative. Hence your promotion. Hence my promotion, Theris repeated, hoping he was keeping the disgust of being treated like a pawn out of his voice. You couldn't really expect more from the council. Realistically, he knew that. But still, on some level. If they can't use their known agents on a probable snipe hunt, the girl said, well then the solution is obvious. Promote someone qualified and make his first job the grunt work that no one really wants. Sorry, she said, rather convincingly. Theris rubbed his temple. I'm guessing if I refuse, any hope I have of rising in the council's eyes is forfeit, he asked forlornly. That's putting it mildly, she answered. Actually, you'd be lucky if a permanent blight on your career is all they did to you. You're a smart man. I think you know as well as I do that the powers that be really wouldn't be keen on letting someone that had proven they wouldn't be controlled wander about with admittedly only possible knowledge that there might be something brewing on the other side. Theris stayed standing straight, despite the feeling of ice starting to go through his veins. He flashed back to how the girl had managed to appear out of nowhere at the start. What kind of orders did she have if it looked like he wanted to refuse? Would he be able to protect himself if she vanished back into the darkness as quickly as she'd appeared? Against most other enemies he'd come across in his missions, he knew immediately the answer to be yes. Here? He was not so sure. He thought long and hard for more than a minute. The girl just stood there patiently, staring at him. Of course, when he got right down to it, it wasn't really a hard choice at all. He picked up his head and looked at her. All right, how do I prepare for this mission? She beamed at him proudly, apparently happy that he had come to the right decision. Well, first we take you to school. You need to know how to blend in on the other side like a native. That's going to take time. Fortunately, me and a couple of others will be there to guide you every step of the way. Memorize this address, she said, handing him a small scrap of paper with some writing scroll on it, within the next 2 minutes, and then destroy it. You'll meet me there in 3 days. That's when we'll really start. She twirled her fingers, and the magical makeshift awning melted back into the masonry. Theris was drenched once again. And what do I call you when I see you again? He asked as he spat dirty rainwater out of his mouth. He stopped and thought about that for a moment. I don't know. I guess that for you, we'll have you call me Lyra. Yeah, Lyra sounds good. She nodded with a look of satisfaction. Oh, and you can use magic again, so you should warm yourself up. Before Theris could reply, a loud noise came from the end of the alley. He immediately whirled his head around, looking for the source of the sound. Where the hell had it come from? There. All the way at the end of the alley, that bum that he had first spotted when he arrived had leapt up from his spot, and was sprinting away as fast as he could. Theris swore aloud. Was this someone who had been listening in on their conversation and was trying to escape and relay it to someone now that it was over? Theris wasn't sure that made sense. They had been very quiet. Only someone right on top of them would have been able to hear them. Admittedly, he hadn't been able to cast any magic to prevent eavesdropping due to the restrictions on him at the start. But as Lyra said, that didn't apply to her. Surely she had been smart enough to cast such magic on herself, right? If that had been a spy, shouldn't he be trying to be more subtle than this? Shouldn't he have waited for them to leave, keeping up with the incoherent bum act the entire time, and escaping with the information long after they'd forgotten about him? Theris' stomach lurched. The more he thought about it, the more he doubted this man was some kind of rebel counterintelligence. Probably it was just a man who'd somehow heard too much and realized that this knowledge was going to put him in danger. And so, in a panic, he'd gotten up and was trying to escape. For a brief fraction of a second, Theris considered the mad idea of letting the man go. But that wouldn't do. He had to get him, to learn just what he'd heard. If he had heard everything, then that made him a threat, even if it wasn't a member of a rebel cell. If he blabbed that the council thought there might be escaped traitors on Earth, that might embolden people on this side to go looking for them, contact them, and bring them back into the fight. Things on this side would only get worse. Theris realized what he had to do. He couldn't let the man go. He couldn't even simply capture him and take him in for interrogation. He had to take him out. All these thoughts passed through Theris' mind in no more than a fraction of a second. There was almost no discernible time taken between his realization that the man was running and the bolt of energy that left his hand, aiming directly for the man's heart. A target it unerringly found, and passed right through. Theris blinked hard. The man that he just tried to strike down disappeared in a puff of mist. That had not been what his spell was supposed to do. A sudden bolt of realization smacked him in the head. He turned around, flashing an accusatory look at Lyra. The smile on her face was still impish, but there was something different about her eyes now. They didn't seem to look down at him quite so much as they had a moment ago. They seemed much more approving. Good choice, was all she said. Theris felt himself start to shake as she looked at him. Damn it. It wasn't just the cold of the rain that was slowly seeping into his bones. That sudden, unexpected test, that illusionary threat that she had clearly conjured, had left him a quivering mess. He tried to contain the shaking, but he just couldn't seem to stop. Lyra walked forward and put her hand on his shoulder. Theris could feel himself suddenly getting warmer. He realized that steam was coming off him, and no water was sticking to him. Lyra adjusted his sleeve a little bit. Killing for the cause is never easy. It's not supposed to be. But we needed to be certain that you do it to protect your mission, without hesitation. She took a step back, looking Theris fully in the face. Theris glanced down at the address written on the slip of paper in his hand. Is this real? He asked, his voice sounding very rough. Lyra nodded. Theris stared down at it for a minute longer, memorizing the letters and numbers contained on it. Then he crumpled up the paper and lit it on fire. He exhaled as he dropped the smoldering embers to the ground. He stood up straight and looked Lyra in the eye. She returned his gaze without flinching. Congratulations, Theris Yarn. Now you really have passed the test. Welcome to the Hunter's Order, she said, holding out her hand for him to shake. For a moment, Theris didn't move. And then, without any further hesitation, he lifted his hand and shook hers.